From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
It's often considered the sleepy corner of the State House, the office of Lieutenant Governor. Cool Moves candidate Bob Healy famously campaigned on getting rid of the position altogether, but Cumberland Mayor Dan McKee has a different platform. He wants to make the office, in his words, more meaningful. The six-term Democratic mayor will face Secretary of State Ralph Mollison in a primary, and Warwick Mayor Scott Avedian, a Republican, is also mulling a run. This week on the first half of Newsmakers, Mayor Dan McKee. Then, the Rhode Island Community Food Bank serves 68,000 families each month. But even with demand on the rise, donations are down, according to their latest status report. This week on the second half of Newsmakers, we welcome the CEO of the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, Andrew Schiff.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Mayor, welcome back to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invite.
Why do you want to be Lieutenant Governor?
That's a good question. I think that that office carries some influence, and I would use that influence to talk about issues that have to do with education, have to do with the economy, have to do with safe streets, and one of the key issues that I had experienced, Tim, is the fact that I've worked with municipal leaders throughout the state of Rhode Island, and I understand what drives communities, what makes them solvent, what doesn't make them solvent.
And specifically, I want to get into that later in the program. You've talked a lot about state aid to cities and towns and inequity there. But you had said in your speech that you want to make that office more meaningful. So has the 2 terms of Elizabeth Roberts been meaningless?
No, in fact, exactly opposite that. I've had conversations with the Lieutenant Governor prior to my announcing, and I think that the work that she's done on the health care issue and the rollout of the health care speaks for itself. I mean, on a national level. So she's been very successful, and I think that you would create continuity in that office about extending that health care in that office.
Yeah, but that's not a ringing endorsement, is it? Make it more meaningful.
No, I think that I think everybody should be trying to improve the space that they're in. So that's certainly not a knock on her work. It's what it is a reflection of that. I think that the public is asking for a wider purpose for that office. But inside the office right now, you chair the Emergency Management Advisory Council. I've mentioned this a few times. I've worked with mayors throughout the state of Rhode Island that want to regionalize the public safety dispatching, have not been able to do that. That office is a perfect place to launch that effort, regionalizing that, saving taxpayers thousands of dollars, and also creating a high level of efficiency in that space. I think that you can do your issues that you incline to be really been successful at, as I have been with education. I've been with solvent communities issues, and we can get into that. And then third, I think that I would provide other ways that office could, that you could work with the General Assembly, which I have been able to be very successful at working with the General Assembly, about how to actually be intentional in terms of strengthening that office.
Why not, one question we got when we said you're having on the show, people said was, why not just run for governor? You know, if you're running for lieutenant governor, you're saying you could be the governor, God forbid if something bad happens to the governor. Why run for this mostly powerless office? The things you want, the governor has a lot more impact on education than the lieutenant governor.
Well, I've had a great deal of success out of the mayor's office, right, with items that weren't supposedly in my wheelhouse as well. So whether it's regionalizing the 4 independent fire districts that I needed the General Assembly approval on, which we got approval on that last year, whether it's the school funding formula, whether it's the regionalizing the mayoral academies. These are all things that came through the General Assembly that weren't necessarily in my purview, right? So in the Lieutenant Governor's office, you would do the same thing. Yes, I would be prepared to take over as a governor of the state. I think that I would. As I've said to a few people, I would be the best Tom Brady the state's ever had in terms of being prepared to take over in a situation and drive us to a Super Bowl. But right now, the Lieutenant Governor's office, for me, I think I'm very well suited for that based on my experience and where I'm coming from.
You claim the current formula for state aid to cities and towns specifically with the car tax, unfairly hurts suburbs. We don't have an endless amount of time on this program, so in a nutshell, explain what you mean by that.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's an urban-suburban issue. It wasn't on the school funding formula, as we found out that Providence and Cumberland and Lincoln and Warwick and Pawtucket and Woonsocket were all being, those students and those taxpayers were being penalized by a lack of a school funding formula, and millions of dollars are rolling in to those communities now. So on the vehicle thing, it's not an urban-suburban issue either. And I think that we should be what happens is the communities who have the highest tax rate, so Barrington at $42 a thousand.
Motor vehicle tax.
Motor vehicle tax. And Cumberland at 19 and change. Over the years, what's happened is that Barrington's car owners are being credited 2 times what a Cumberland car owner is being credited. So that's where the inequity is in that distribution of balance.
Mayor Don Grebian disagrees with that. He said to Go Local Prov, and I quote, "I'm surprised and disappointed to learn that as a community, Pawtucket would be hurt by such a proposal and wish Mayor McKee had reached out to me directly prior to any such announcement." He's saying you'd put the screws to urban areas if you had your way with it.
Well, first of all, that's not accurate. So when I championed the school funding formula, commissioned the report, signed on by then Pawtucket Mayor Doyle and Mayor Cicilline, 700,000 people, and corrected that problem, that benefited communities that were being, that the funding was inequitable. It's the same thing here. Fair is fair. I believe in fair and equitable allocation of state funds. I believe that's in the best interest of everybody in the state to have fair and equitable allocations of state funds.
But would it be a net loss for Pawtucket?
Where do you live?
Where do I live?
Yes,
in Bristol.
In Bristol.
Yeah.
Bristol has about a $19 rate on its vehicle tax, right? And they also were getting about $6,000 per student on their education. Yes, they're being phased back because a community like Lincoln was getting $2,300 a student. To get it right in the state of Rhode Island, you need to create equitable allocations from the state into the municipalities. Once you level the playing field, everybody's on the same playing field, and at that point in time we can move forward.
But again, specific to my question, Pawtucket Mayor sees it, Don Grebian sees it as a net loss to his city if this were to go forward. Is he right or wrong?
I don't think he's right.
Okay.
And I think from a cash point of view it might be true, but because they've taken it, which we objected to, from $130 million of money into the phase out down to $10 million in the phase out, this is the appropriate time to reset equitable allocation of funds in the communities because the damage is very insignificant at this point in time.
You're closely associated, Mayor, with the charter school movement in Rhode Island, education reform. That's become a big fissure inside the Democratic Party that you're a member of because the Democratic-aligned teachers unions often disagree with officials like yourself about expanding those alternative schools. I'm wondering how that's impacted your career and if you've ever considered leaving the Democratic Party over education reform.
No, I'm a Democrat. And I believe in the principles of the Democratic Party, which has to do with working families. I'm a small business person. My dad was a small business person when he was alive. I'm for great public schools. I'm not for one school over the other. I'm for great public schools. In this case, you're specifically talking about my efforts in the Mayoral Academy. A regionalized public school, Pawtucket, Center Falls, Cumberland, and Lincoln, that has been incredibly successful and is driving change into my district school. So as a mayor, my main job is the health of my community. What I'm doing in the Mayoral Academy is also positively impacting my district school. Right now, we're the 3rd fastest improving district in the state of Rhode Island. We're changing the way that we run our district schools, and I think that the Mayoral Academy has had something to do with that. So anybody who's for great public schools, they're going to be with me.
Do you expect education reform groups spent a lot of money trying to help John Connolly become mayor of Boston? Do you expect to get support from national groups like that in your run for lieutenant governor?
I think that some of the donations would come in from people that are aligned with me and the idea that I think that there is a need to change the way that we operate our public schools to benefit the taxpayers in the community and the students that live in those communities. So I'm sure that they'll be aligned with that.
Do you expect strong opposition from labor, specifically teachers unions, to your running for lieutenant governor?
I think that there's going to be some positions taken by the leadership but I don't think necessarily from the teachers. Because, I mean, again, go back to the school funding formula. There's no one that's worked that issue stronger than myself and the municipal leaders that worked to bring in substantial amount of money into 4 out of every 5 classrooms in the state of Rhode Island. 4 out of every 5 students we're getting shortchanged. So from that point of view, and then the other thing that I'm going to be really working on is there's inequitable issues that have to do with the teachers that work in 2 out of every 3 districts, Tim. In fact, that they're not allowed to have the same Social Security benefits as a person that's working outside of those districts. So that I'm not. The unions have a job to do, and that's to protect their membership, which represents about 1% of the state of Rhode Island. My job as a lieutenant governor would be to represent that 1% and the 100%.
I want to shift gears a little bit. This week we broke a story about a hire Secretary of State Ralph Mollis made when he was the mayor of North Providence. He brought on a 52-year-old as a rookie firefighter, and now that individual is collecting a disability pension and missed out half his career to various injuries. What was your reaction to that story?
Well, I don't think it's smart to be hiring in on public safety in that space. I don't do that as a mayor in terms of I hire in our rescue, I hire in our police. So I think you got to be very careful to protect the taxpayers from an incident that could actually be legitimate. This one doesn't smell quite right, but I mean you want to be very careful how you do your hiring, and I have been. Whether it's my practice on hiring has been to hire qualified people, even into my highway department, CDL licensed, people who can plow, people who can do the work in the streets, and of course recommendations are important, and I value those, but their skill set is very important.
Can you say with confidence you've been able to completely eliminate politics from the hiring process? That was a big element to this story. Secretary of State Mollis denies that played a role here, but you know, you're a mayor of Cumberland. Is that something you've been able to eliminate completely from that process?
In terms of if somebody was asking me to hire someone...
It's who you know, Mayor. That's what everybody in Rhode Island says. It's who you know.
No, I don't think that my staffing hasn't represented that. But like I said, if you have equal people and someone's from Cumberland, to work in the town of Cumberland, they're going to get preference. So if someone comes in and gives me a good recommendation of somebody that I respect, and you have people who are equal, then I'm going to hire the people that I get the good reference in.
Mayor,
I do that in my business.
Moody's earlier this year put out a report on Cumberland's financial health. Overall, pretty positive. You have a good bond rating there, but Moody's did express concern about Cumberland's underfunded police pension plan, the shortfall there. And it said that in 2010, 2011, and 2012, the town did not make its full payment into the pension plan. Now, in an era when we're constantly hearing about towns not keeping up their end of the bargain with workers, how do you defend that?
State cuts. That was the town of Cumberland lost $4 million, and in one 12-month cycle lost $2.5 million. Yeah, we had to balance the budget, but we've recovered. You know, we're recovering right now. And also, I'm the first. When I came mayor in 2001, there was not an actuary done for 5 years. You know, I was responsible to have one every 2 years. I do one every single year. Our average contribution over the time that I've been in office is 93% contribution. Yes, it got derailed by the loss of the revenue on the general revenue and the loss of the revenue on the vehicle. And you know that I was one of the most vocal people in the state of Rhode Island, and I would continue to be vocal in the Lieutenant Governor's office, because when the cuts were coming to the municipalities, there wasn't really anybody on the state level that was advocating for the taxpayers in those communities for those.
Mayor, and you know, you're now in negotiations with unions and retirees to reduce benefits and shore up that plan. Where does that stand, and will it be done before you're out of office as mayor? I
would say that it will be done before I get out of office, and it could be done before the end of this year.
Mayor, we have...
And in that space, my whole idea is to reset going forward and to keep the promises that were made to the officers that have worked or retired, and I believe that that's what's going to happen.
With a little less than a minute left to go, you said education would be a big part of your job if you were a lieutenant governor. Do you support Mayor Angel Taveras' call for universal pre-K?
Yes, I do, but I want to tell you what I did in my office, which I opened up an office for children, youth, and learning, which we focus on the first 2 decades of a child's life. We currently are doing early math, early reading programs into that age group. So what I would say is, yes, I do, but we got to find ways to do things as cost effective as we possibly can. That Office for Children, Youth and Learning is an example of doing pre-K work at a very low cost.
Is that your concern with his proposal, quickly, how to pay for it?
I think you always have to be concerned or how much it costs. But what I would say, there's ways to work with young families, with young kids. I've done that for the last 7 years. Hundreds of kids have gone through, thousands of kids have gone through my early reading program as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, and 5-year-old, and the early math programs that now are entering our public schools. And that's one of the reasons why our public schools are one of the fastest improving districts in the state.
As we go to a break here, I just want to put you on the spot. Ralph Mollis, Secretary of State, said he would debate you right here at Channel 12. Will you do it?
I'll debate any candidate that announces.
That is the commitment. All right.
Yes.
Mayor of Cumberland, Dan McKee, who is a candidate for Lieutenant Governor, thank you for joining us on the program.
Well, thank you.
When we come back, need is up, but donations are down. We have the CEO of the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, Andrew Schiff. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest for the second half is the CEO of the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, Andrew Schiff. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
We are taping this show the day before Thanksgiving. Most people are going to be watching it after they've enjoyed their dinner. You released your annual status report. What's the executive summary here? What is the state of the state for the food bank and the demand?
So it's very troubling. We're seeing more people than ever enrolled in government nutrition programs and more people than ever coming to emergency food programs in the state. And things are really difficult. Families are struggling, and there are a number of things that are making things more difficult. One is that SNAP benefits were recently cut November 1st. Congress is planning more cuts.
SNAP, just for people at home, that's what was the food stamp program, the
That's
new
right.
name for it.
Yeah, and also donations of food to the food bank are down. So we're seeing a situation where need is up, supply of food donations are down, and government benefits are decreased.
Specifically to the donations down, looking at your annual report, it said that the food bank received 8.2 million pounds of food donations in fiscal 2009. That has steadily dropped over the years, and the last, in fiscal 2013, it was 6.4 million pounds. That's a steep drop. What's the reason? Why is it down?
So food banks were founded on the idea that there's lots of excess food in the system and that all we had to do was get supermarkets and the food industry to donate it to food banks. It was a win-win for everybody, right? But what's happened is food industry has become much more efficient. Computerized inventory, all the food, when I first began in this work 10, 12 years ago, there was lots of extra surplus food available to food banks, and that's just not true anymore.
But so that is just odd to hear that efficiency is hurting you. Waste used to help the food bank. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. That's what food banks were based on, that we didn't want people throwing food into dumpsters. Donate it, help the poor. It worked for a long time, but the supermarkets are still incredibly generous to us. They're philanthropic, but they also are business, and their job is to sell the food, not to give it away.
Andrew, going back to what you were saying initially, I think some people at home are probably going to wonder, how is it possible things are still getting worse? You know, Rhode Island's recession started in 2007 when you look at the job numbers. We've had a very weak but still slight improvement since 2010. Certainly haven't lost more jobs. I mean, why do you think you're still seeing rising demand when, in theory, the economy is at least having a moderate recovery?
Yeah, so the economy, it just hasn't improved enough for the people that we serve. So folks are back to work, but at low-wage jobs that don't give enough earned income to be able to afford adequate food for their families. That's the problem. And that's one of the things that we highlight in the report, the plight of working families. Working poor families have had it really tough, and they're continuing to struggle.
What has been the commitment from the state to the food bank, specifically from the General Assembly?
So we receive each year a community service grant, and that was cut from the highest level, which was about $340,000 in 2008, to half that amount. So now we get $173,000 from the state. We have a $7 million budget. So We don't depend on that money, obviously. We depend on charitable donations from the public to run the food bank. But we really would like to see our grant restored, and we will use every dollar of the state money just to bring in more food. And we can bring in 3 pounds of food for every dollar.
I was struck, your report says Massachusetts spends $1.54 per capita supporting the food banks in Massachusetts, and Rhode Island only spends 16 cents. Again, Massachusetts $1.54, Rhode Island 16 cents. That is in line with Connecticut, which spends 17 cents. Why is it so much lower state support for food banks? Does Massachusetts just have a different program or a different commitment?
It's a commitment level, and also New Jersey and New York, these other states have always had a tradition of supporting the food banks. They've been ahead of the curve on seeing that food donations are down. So the state steps in with funding, with grants, to help food banks at least maintain the same level of food assistance, and that's really what we're looking for from the General Assembly.
Well, most people watching this program aren't lawmakers or politicians, so we tend to skew high in that area with our viewership. A lot of people are the average Joe and Jane. What should they do? How can they help?
So it doesn't matter if the dollar comes from the state or a dollar comes from an individual. Every dollar helps. Every can of food donated helps.
But would you rather have food, money or food? I'm curious.
Well, money we can make go a lot further,
Okay.
because we're able to get food into the food bank we're part of this national organization, Feeding America, that solicits national donations, and we're able to get those donations. The donations aren't in the state, so we have to freight in the food. That's what a lot of donations help us do, to bring in those donations from out of state, particularly from farmers. A lot of the donations that we're getting now are fresh produce donations from farmers in California, in Florida. It's a great thing because that's healthy food. It's the type of food you really want a family to receive.
Andrew, before the show, I looked at the latest data on food stamp usage in Rhode Island. SNAP is the new name for it. In August, the latest month available, about 180,000 Rhode Islanders were on food stamps, about 17% of the state's population. I mean, what do you make of that number? It does seem almost extraordinary that 1 in 5 Rhode Islanders is a food stamp recipient now.
So it's an income-based program, so it tells you just how much trouble we're in, that people are applying for the program and they're eligible for that help. The other thing that we know, particularly working closely with the food pantries that receive food from the food bank, is a lot of the people who are on SNAP benefits, it's a modest benefit. They're not getting enough to be able to actually feed their family through the whole month, often running through the benefit before the end of the month, and then turning to us for help.
The benefit was actually reduced, went back to the pre-stimulus level at the beginning of this month, November. I'm wondering if you've seen any impact yet from that cut. Like you said, it's a modest benefit, but I assume every dollar counts for those folks, and if you expect it to have an impact.
I think it's going to absolutely have an impact. A lot of the food pantries are reporting that they're seeing many more new families who have never come for assistance before. We're also just concerned that families who have been coming for assistance are going to have greater need, because for a family of 4, it's $36 less a month. That may not seem like a lot of money, but for these folks, they were running out of the benefit before the end of the month anyway, and now they'll be running out of the benefit even earlier.
You know, there's been some attention to waste, fraud, and abuse in the SNAP program. How rampant do you think it is?
I think it's minimal. I think that the USDA does an incredibly good job of staying on top of fraud and making sure that they work closely with federal and state officials to catch people, and I think that sends an important message to anyone who would think about ripping off the system.
Is there an argument to be made that there would be less waste and fraud by supporting programs like yours, because that is a direct, food, you're giving food to the families as opposed to sort of a benefit on a card or so on and so forth? Is there an argument there for that?
I don't really think so. I think the important thing to know about the SNAP benefit is it's also an economic stimulus. That benefit is being spent at supermarkets, and the supermarkets are hiring people to work in the supermarket, so that's the benefit from that program. In aggregate, the cut in SNAP benefits that happened November 1st is $20 million less SNAP benefits to Rhode Island over the next year. Who's that going to hurt? It's going to hurt people who receive the benefits. It's also going to hurt supermarkets. We're concerned about that.
What do you think, Andrew, though? There's also a criticism, a critique you hear that this significant growth in the food stamp program is going to lead to dependency among the people using it. It's going to create a sort of an underclass of people who are too reliant on this, and it's sort of keeping them from, up by their bootstraps, that sort of. I mean, you hear it a lot. You hear it all over the place. I mean, what do you say when people say it to you?
I think that people really don't rely on SNAP. It's the safety net. Folks would much rather have an increase in their wages or a better job and get off the benefit completely, be able to afford food themselves.
Andrew, we have less than 30 seconds. Where can people donate?
So we're seeing tons of families driving up to the food bank, particularly this week, with donations. They should keep coming. Our holiday meal drive goes right through to Christmas. We love it when people come and visit. We have an open house Saturday, December 7th. Come down, say hello.
Andrew Schiff, CEO of the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, thanks for joining us. And you know what? On our Newsmakers website, we'll be sure to put a link to your website. Thank you for joining us. Hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers. And you know what? I'll put up the